In this lesson, we will learn how to manage keyframes and cycle animation in the graph editor. Now, the graph editor is your #1 tool for polishing and animation. We'll find it underneath Window, Animation Editors, and you'll see it right at the top. Okay, let's go ahead and select our Shift Control to load everything in. So what you'll see on our left are all of the channels that have received animation. On the very left, you can pin each channel down. So let's say if you were to deselect, you'll still see that pin channel. Once you click off again, it clears everything out. And then on our right, what we find is the F-curve display. So this is where we would actually fine-tune our animations. We can use the F key to frame all. We could also navigate as we normally would in our viewport, so holding down Alt, and now we can go ahead and pan using the middle mouse button, or we can use the right mouse button to zoom in. What I also really enjoy using is the interactive zoom. Holding down Shift and Alt, we can now use the right mouse button to either get a closer view vertically or horizontally, depending on how we drag the mouse. Okay, great. So at that point, let's go and explain what we see here, and we'll focus on our Translate Y. So by looking at the Translate Y, this may look like, all right, the graph is moving up, so we know that that is our up and down axis, or up and down motion. Well, that isn't necessarily true, because if we were to take a look at our Rotate Z, you can see that as the curve moves down, our ship is still moving up. So really this has nothing to do with the direction of the ship necessarily. It has more to do with the change in value. So as this key moves down, that means the rotation Z value is moving down. So if we scrub from 1 to 15, we can see that change in our value, and that is what is reflected here. Now, as we select each dot on this curve, this represents our keyframes, of course. And then we also have these handles here called tangent handles, which we can use to modify our animation further. So at times, you may not want to add an extra keyframe, but instead, you'd want to modify your tangent handle to see if that would get you the results you need. And if that's the case, well, more power to you, because you have added improvements without having to clutter up your function curve. So the tangent handles work well because it's just a way of keeping your curve as optimized as possible while still giving you incredible results. Okay, great. So what I'll do is go ahead and bring the tangent back down to kind of bring the curve back to where it was before. So how can we go in and add keyframes to this? Well, you'd first want to make sure you've set an initial keyframe from your viewport. And then we're able to use the Add Key tool or even Insert Key tool to add more resolution to our function curve, which will in turn give us more control over how the animation behaves. So if we wanted to, we can use, let's say, the Insert Key tool on frame 23 to add a keyframe. In order to do so, you'd first want your F-curve selected. And then at that point, you'll find the Insert Key tool at the very top. You'll also see that the Add Key tool is no longer accessible from the top toolbar. However, we can access it under the Keys menu. The difference between the two is the Insert Key tool will preserve your tangency. It will preserve your function curve while still adding a keyframe. So this is a cleaner way, in my opinion, of adding keyframes. However, the Add Key tool is going to look at your previous key. So in our case, we might want to use the Insert Key tool, and then we can now middle click on the time at which we want the keyframe added. You can see there it is on our time slider, and there's the little key on our function curve. All right, so at this point, if you like to move your key around, you can use your move tool. So just hit the W key on your keyboard, and now you can use the middle mouse button to kind of drag around. So if we drag up, we know that we're changing the value of this key. If we drag from side to side, we're changing the timing. So I've just dragged this to about frame, let's say about 33 or so, and that's indicated right here in our time and value field. So we can go ahead and take a look at the behavior. We'll hit play. And that's not the best result. It's kind of wobbly and there's a bit of a pause. We have somewhat of a moving hold going on, and moving holds are great. However, in this case, it's not going to do us too much good. But if you'd like to learn more about moving holds, feel free to take a look at character interaction in Maya. But I'll now go ahead and grab that key on 33 and delete it by simply hitting the delete key. All right, so we know how to move keys, remove keys, and we know how to modify our tangent handles. And there's so much more you can do, and we're just kind of skimming the surface, but feel free to take a look at Introduction to Animation in Maya as well if you'd like a more in-depth look into how we can work with these tools. But let's say we start to work on our seamless cycle. So if I were to go ahead and just focus in on the Rotate Z F curve, just press the F key, clearly we'll see why we're getting a pause even though our range is playing back properly from 1 to 60. That's because as we leave our first key, there's a bit of a hold here, and then we have the animation speed up as we start to move down to the next key. And again, when we start to have this cushion here, that means that the animation kind of slows in. And again, it'll start to speed up. So you kind of get the idea of the change that's happening. So what we want here is to adjust our start and end keys so that they blend well, just like the in-between keys we've set. In order to do that, it's helpful to first cycle the animation. And here's why. Let's go ahead and head over to View and show the infinite curve. All right, so you can see, all right, here's what's going to happen before and after the animation. Now watch this. Let's go ahead and cycle our rotation Z. So I'll go ahead and actually select the ship and just take care of the cycle for all animated channels. Once the ship is selected, we can now choose curves, pre-infinity cycle. Take a look at that. Now before the animation will have some movement. To kind of show you this, if we were to go to our start range here and set this to, let's say, -20, and now double click on our range slider, you can see when we pass that value of 1, our first key, you can see we still have movement. Whereas if we were to turn the cycle off, let's go back to pre-infinity constant, no longer do we have any movement. Okay, great. So I'm going to go ahead and set that back to pre-infinity cycle, and we'll do the same thing for post-infinity. Now let's take a look at this. Let's go back to our rotation Z. So clearly we can see the pause now. As we exit the animation and come back into our start key, there's a bit of a delay here. And the same thing goes for the end of our function curve. So we want a nice blend out of our real function curve into the infinite, and the same thing goes for the beginning. We want a very nice, seamless transition. So in order to do that, it's just a matter of grabbing your start and end keys. We can now grab our end tangents on the right side, and then at that point we can just zoom in to one keyframe, middle mouse button click, and start to drag down until our tangent blends into the infinite curve and the true function curve. So we've taken care of that on both sides. Awesome. So watch this. If we were to minimize the graph editor and again knock off the last frame so we could only view from 1 to 60, I'll go ahead and set the start time back to 1. If we hit play, you will now notice we have a seamless cycle. Beautiful. No longer do we have that pause. Now, what about the y-axis? Well, don't we need to do the same thing? Now, the great thing is, because we've added a midpoint key, we don't need to take care of the y-axis because, again, we've added a key right there at the very midpoint of the animation. So there was no need to adjust the anchor points here. You can see by looking at our infinite curve, we're good to go. However, again, if we had keys that were offset from our midpoint, then we'd have to go in and possibly adjust the function curve to cycle correctly. But now we are good to go again. So if you wanted to, you can set your end range to 300, hit play, and you'll see that the animation will continue. So cycling is great for background characters that need to kind of walk. Or let's say if you had a prop, let's say a fan that needed to oscillate, well, you can go ahead and cycle your function curve, and in turn that will save you a ton of time. Well, with that said, we are now ready to learn about path animation, which we will move on to in the following lesson.